Who are your heroes? The next speaker has always admired Ronald Reagan. Recently, Nancy Reagan died, and this brought her and her former husband back into the news. Nancy was known for an anti-drug campaign using the slogan, "Just say no." Tonight, Erik Wiese will talk about how critical those words were to the Reagan Revolution. This is a non-manual speech, 10 to 12 minutes. Please welcome up Mr. Erik Wiese. Just say no.
Glad to see only one of my audience has bolted for the door.
It's still early.
Oh, okay, that's bad. On March 31st, 1981, John Hinckley stood up with a gun, a .22 caliber revolver, shot off 6, blam, 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 blam. Hit Reagan right in the chest, right in his lung. Hit 2 other Secret Service men and killed Jim Brady. Hit and killed 1 person and almost killed Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan was carted off to the hospital. This was early in the first administration of Ronald Reagan. Nobody really knew what they were going to see over the next 4 to 8 years. And Ronald Reagan was being operated on, and he joked to his physicians, he said, "Well, I sure hope all of you are Republicans." And he turned to his wife, Nancy, and said, "I'm sorry, Nancy, I forgot to duck." And he went under the knife, and as we all know, he came out, and he then had the next 7 years as a hero, a man who had survived an assassination attempt. He could have given up, he chose not to. Very soon after that, his resolve was tested by the air traffic control, who went on strike in August of 1981. They had signed a contract saying that because they were necessary part of the system of transportation, they would never go on strike. It was in their contract. But they said, what's this crippled old man going to do about it? So 11,000 of them walked out on strike. Ronald Reagan said, you know what, I sympathize with you guys. I used to be in charge of a union over in California. I actually led the union in order to instigate new rules that would protect people. But you're violating the terms of your contract. As much as I sympathize with you, you guys have 2 days to go back to work. If you don't go back to work, we're going to fire you all, and we're going to move the military in to take over your jobs. Don't test me. Well, the grand majority of them showed back up to work. Some of them didn't and were fired. And that showed the nation what they had not seen before then. A man who was going to follow through on his word and was not going to let our country be paralyzed with fear or by the strength of public unions. He followed this up with the nomination and eventual appointment of, I believe, the first woman to ever sit on the Supreme Court, Sandra Day O'Connor. And one of his motivations for putting a woman on the Supreme Court was he wanted to get Roe versus Wade overturned. In his own words, once I get to it, he said, we have the duty to protect the life of an unborn child. We have the duty to protect the life of an unborn child. That was one of his motivations. Sandra Day O'Connor was one of a couple different people who tried to put on the Supreme Court. Robert Bork would have been a great choice, but he got borked. His name is actually a verb now, and it means to be unfairly taken advantage of. At least that's how Republicans remember it. So the fourth thing he did, which hadn't been done in a long, long time, is Ronald Reagan was known for standing up to the Soviet Union. And he proved it. There was a rescue mission of Grenada that took place on October 25th, 1983. There was 800 medical students who were down on this Caribbean island. The Cubans had infiltrated the island, were in danger of taking those 800 students as hostages. Ronald Reagan found out about it, and he launched a rescue mission. And we rescued without any of those 800 being killed or wounded in any way, and we took over the island of Grenada. This set him up for his re-election. He got re-elected not too long after that, and I remember the famous words that he used when he was getting re-elected. Under my administration, not 1 square inch of free soil had been lost to the communists. He's the only president been able to say that in 20 years. Under Jimmy Carter, Afghanistan had been taken over by the communists. Angola had been taken over by the communists. Nicaragua was being infiltrated by the communists. The Cubans were trying to take Grenada. Cambodia had been taken over by the communists. We'd had a string of failure after failure after failure, all the way until Ronald Reagan and Nancy Reagan said, just say no, and mean it. To the air traffic controllers, just say no to their strike, and mean it. We finally had a man that we could be proud of as president, and he won re-election by a landslide. By a landslide, totally devastated the liberal who was running against him. Wiped him out. I think it was Walter Mondale, wasn't it? Yes, it's hard to remember the guy's name. So he got re-elected. One of the first things he did in his second term, the Strategic Defense Initiative. Up to that time, we had the Mutually Assured Destruction Strategy. What we basically announced to the Soviet Union was, go ahead and drop some atomic bombs on us. We will annihilate you with a second strike. And there's no way you're going to eliminate all of our ballistic missiles in a first strike, so you got to know that you're going to be devastated. And we had thousands and thousands of weapons. There's only 40, 50 good targets that are over in Russia, and there's only 40 or 50 good targets here in America. So we were overwhelming them with obliterating amounts of destruction that could have brought on a nuclear winter and actually destroyed the entire world if it ever happened. And that was what our entire basis of defense was on. And Ronald Reagan said, this is crazy. We have nuclear proliferation going on. We're going to end up with some rogue states like Iran getting the missile. Are we going to obliterate them? Are we going to allow them to obliterate us? What we need is an anti-ballistic missile defense system. And so what he did is we had actually signed an agreement saying we weren't going to have one of those. And in order to make sure that it was legal, we had our allies, the Israelites, develop the entire program so that we could be in compliance with the laws and then not actually abrogate that treaty until we were ready to put in a functional, not fully functional, but something that was 50 or 60% effective, and then we've gradually built it up year after year after year until it's 90% effective. And now we have an anti-ballistic missile defense system that can protect us from North Korea or Iran or any of these other crazies. That would never have happened if it wasn't for Ronald Reagan saying to Russian extremism, just say no. And to a mutually assured destruction, just say no. The anti-drug campaign, 1986. We budgeted $1.7 billion to fund the war on drugs in America and increase the severity of punishments for drug-related offenses. Just like President Bush has commented, drugs enslave you. They enslave you. They make you an addict. They will crush your spirit. They will trap your soul. It is a modern form of slavery. Ronald Reagan was against it. All Republicans have been against it. We need to enforce our nation's drug laws. Ronald Reagan was one of the first people who did that, and Nancy Reagan spearheaded that movement by just saying no. The reduction of nuclear arms took place in 1987. Why? Because the Soviet Union couldn't push us around anymore. The nation of concerned scientists had that little graph that used to show how close we were to being obliterated through nuclear war. And every single year that Ronald Reagan was in office, it got closer and closer to the midnight deadline when we were going to wipe each other out with the nuclear weapons, because Ronald Reagan knew how to negotiate, similar to like Trump's doing nowadays, and he was bombastic about it, and he scared the Soviet Union into folding. They couldn't compete with us for Star Wars. They couldn't match the huge investment we were making in an anti-ballistic missile defense system. So they threw in the towel. They decided they were going to try an experiment. They were going to move away from socialism and communism. They got Gorbachev into office, and in 1987 they came and actually signed an agreement, the INF Treaty, and it eliminated all cruise missiles with a range of 500 to 5,000 kilometers. So peace through strength worked. It worked. Not what the concerned scientists were advocating, which is that we give up, or that we unilaterally freeze, or even that we unilaterally get rid of all of our missiles. No. Being bombastic, not being intimidated, being forward-leaning, as he used to call it, worked. And Gorbachev came running to sign that agreement and show that the Soviet Union was relevant. What's interesting is not too long after this, when the second George Bush was in office, he said, we have such an effective anti-ballistic missile weapon system now, we don't even care if they come to the table to get rid of their own nuclear weapons. We're going to unilaterally decrease ours. because we don't need to obliterate the world 20 times over. Doing it once is just fine. And so he eliminated 75% of the nuclear missiles without even getting the Soviet Union to agree to it. And the Soviet Union was so scared that they were being shown as being irrelevant, they demanded a seat at the table to give up some of their weapons in order to appear relevant. Perfect negotiating strategy. Did President Bush get any credit for it? Nah. But anyway, that's a little bit of a side story. The Berlin Wall speech. Does anyone remember what he said at the Berlin Wall? President Reagan stood up there and he said, Gorbachev, tear down this wall. To this wall, just say no. What this wall was, what the Soviet Union was, is a big armed camp to keep all of its slaves, I mean communist comrades, in. Now, we actually try and build walls to keep undesirables out. The Soviet Union and other totalitarian states build walls to keep all their good people in, because otherwise there's a huge brain drain. They all come to the United States. It's good to remember, because some people are actually advocating a socialist state in this country at this point, and if they do that, we're going to have a brain drain. We're going to have all the people who know how to make stuff, who don't want to be taxed at a rate of 90%, and they're going to want to get out. What else can I harangue you about? All right. So, what else happened? In 1988, the Soviet Union withdrew from Afghanistan. Remember how they had taken over Afghanistan under Jimmy Carter? How did we get them out? Does anyone know how we got them out? We went over to all those Afghan freedom fighters, and we got our buddies in Saudi Arabia to fund giving them TOW missiles to shoot down all their helicopters, so that we could credibly claim it wasn't us. It was a CIA thing, where we got the CIA to go get our Saudi Arabian neighbors to fund the whole event, and it was so successful shooting down all of these Russian helicopters, and they couldn't blame us, and they didn't want to invade Saudi Arabia, and so eventually they folded up shop and left. That would never have happened if it wasn't for Ronald Reagan. And finally, yeah, that's so. I want to practice something here. I want to practice something, and I think you guys can do this. Just say no is such an effective slogan. It's so simple, yet so hard to carry out. But I would like you to all say with me tonight, just say no when I prompt you. So, to future tax increases, what do we say?
Just say no.
To Russian expansionism, what do we say?
Just say no.
To air traffic control unions, what do we say?
Just say no.
To the Cuban takeover of Grenada, what do we say?
Just say no.
To illegal drugs enslaving us, what do we say?
Just say no.
To liberals on the Supreme Court, what do we say?
Just say no.
To communism, socialism, and their apologists, what do we say?
Just say no.
And to giving up after an assassination attempt, what do we say?
Just say no.
Exactly. Ronald Reagan is a hero for the ages. Fellow Toastmasters.